2020 presidential election coverage starts now. So let's drop right into this JHK forecast. It's updated daily, so this is the newest up-to-date forecast. The toss-up 10 colors used where neither candidate has a 60% or higher chance of winning. The colored gradients are used to show higher probabilities for Biden or Trump. Deepening in color as the likelihood of winning increases. Light 60%, medium 85%, and dark 95%. It's just how they do it. And they said, so here you could see that the Democrats are sitting at 318 electoral college votes according to this forecast, and the Republicans are at 203. You need 270 to win, which is that threshold, and as you can see, the Democrats have pushed past that threshold, but mostly with leaning states. And so, in order for the Democrats to secure a victory here, I mean, if you've seen any of my previous videos, you'll know this, they need the majority of this Northeast here. So you want all of that. You want, ideally, the entire West Coast. The Democrats could, in theory, lose Oregon, I think, or Arizona. So one of those two they could lose, but essentially the shield here on the West Coast, you want all of it as much as you can. And if they can just get these three states, that appears often to be good enough. As long as they've got this Northeast, they've got these three states, hopefully the rest of it as well. And then they get this Rust Belt over here. Minnesota, as has been pointed out, is not really part of the Rust Belt. There's an Iron Range up here, but it's not really part of the Rust Belt. The Rust Belt really is this border area that connects with the Great Lakes, but not Minnesota. So it includes upper parts of New York State, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, I suppose upper parts of Indiana and Wisconsin. But I don't think Indiana is classically considered a Rust Belt state, but if you look it up, they do class Indiana as a Rust Belt state technically. Now, so I mean, part of the Rust Belt here is what we talk about when we say the northeastern states. So again, New York and Pennsylvania, but also, Minnesota, again, not a Rust Belt state, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Illinois. These four states right here are the Democrats' foothold in sort of the central parts of America. That's their major foothold. If they get these states, they probably win the election. So they need that West Coast, they need the Northeast, they need these Rust Belt states, and they need Florida. And so that is the Democrat, path to victory. But as you can see, there's this huge group which are just simply leaning Democrat. And so if there's any polling error, or if at post debates there's any drift in the polls themselves without any error, the polls themselves actually just drift on average toward the Republican camp. A lot of these guys are sitting at sort of plus 5% for the Democrats at best, and they can easily turn over to the Republican side. This sort of shows the path to Democrat victory. Maine and Nebraska have this sort of striping color, partly because they have split votes, but the reason for that, actually, if you go into it, is that in the Electoral College, in order for the elector to grant the votes to a particular party, they need to win a plurality of votes within a state. So once any party has won a plurality of the votes within the state, which may not, so with respect to the popular vote, you're talking about above 50%. With respect to a plurality, if there's sort of 6 parties and one of them simply wins more, they've won the plurality. The elector then gives them the entire state, so it's an all or nothing thing. That's true across all the states except for Nebraska and Maine. They have different rules, and that's partly why the votes are split here. The way that they've set it up, there's multiple electors, etc. So those ones are a little bit harder to forecast because they follow different rules. But and North Carolina is sort of on a knife's edge in terms of who it goes to. But sort of they have Wisconsin here, and if you say, well, Wisconsin's leaning Democrat, so it might not go Democrat, let's put it in the toss-up column, and let's do that to Pennsylvania as well, another key territory the Democrats need. And let's do it either to Arizona or Nevada. Certainly Florida, we can put that in toss-up territory. Already, simply put Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Florida, which are known toss-up states. I mean, if you guys are honest with yourselves, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Florida, nobody's comfortable. It doesn't matter which side of the political spectrum right now you're sitting on. These are not states that anybody's comfortable really grouping into any party. Yes, it's true that Wisconsin and Pennsylvania in particular do show polling data that frequently shows the Democrats very consistently outperforming Trump, but the margins are so narrow that nobody could say, well, I don't think the polling's going to change over the next, whatever it is, 49, 48 days. And I also don't think there's any polling error. I don't think there's any, the fact that they might be sort of sampling people who may not show up to the polls, or because of the mail-in ballots, maybe there's a overrepresentation of certain groups. Who knows? So all these things can shift what pollsters aren't used to, particularly in an actual election like this, with the coronavirus and everything else. We don't know what's going on with these states. The moment you assign them properly as toss-up states, the Democrats are no longer actually leading the election. But what I would say is that if you just accept the scenario as is, with just Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Florida being adjusted to toss-up states, if you then say, well, there's a 50-50 chance in each state that either party wins, so you're pretty even about that, well, then the Democrats would win about half of this, wouldn't they? And roughly speaking, because obviously if the 50-50 chance is that they end up, I don't know, the Democrats get Wisconsin and North Carolina, and the Republicans get these two, well, because of the way the Electoral College votes, that's 25 votes against 49, so it wouldn't actually be half, but let's just say, very quickly, they get about half of it. That puts them over the 270, okay? So if you really believe they're actually knife's edge, and it's exactly 50-50, then you'd be fairly comfortable saying, I mean, the Democrats only need about a third of those actually to go their way to push them over 270. So this model presents a very optimistic case for Joe Biden. It basically, I mean, if you believe this model, Joe Biden is tipped to win. It is highly unlikely under this model that there's any Republican path to victory right now, excluding whatever campaigning the Democrats do in the coming days and the Republicans do in the coming days. Obviously, if some big piece of news comes out, just a massive piece of news that we just don't know, that could change all of the polls everywhere. And these things do tend to come out toward closer toward elections. People are sort of researching the various candidates, and these things come out. And once they do, that obviously changes how people view those candidates, how people view those parties, and how people view the platforms, and sort of the sincerity with which those parties hold those platforms. All those things are up in alignment. But if you freeze the election, you had it today, according to this model, if you believe the polls, it is practically certain that the Democrats would win the election, simply because those toss-up states, if you assume they're true toss-up states, I mean, even if only 20% of them go to the Democrats, that'll get them over the line, over 270. But, and this is a big but, Michigan is also technically a bit of a toss-up state. I mean, in 2016, it tipped over to the Republicans, and the polling showed it was Democrat. So, depending on where you sit with that, it could swing either way. It is a swing state. Maybe in this election you think, yeah, but in this election it's not going to. I mean, it's not a swing state. It's very much in the Democrat camp, possibly, but it has now the Rust Belt, especially this weak Democrat bit of the Rust Belt, is very iffy, especially since the Republicans will be campaigning in this area because they want to take away the Democrat foothold here in the Rust Belt, because that is their entire path to victory. So they'll be campaigning very, very hard. And I believe that the Republicans have already rallied in Michigan. I could be wrong, but I think that they have. So they're sort of, that's where the majority of their efforts are. Minnesota as well, possible toss-up state. You include that, well, now you give it a 50-50. Yeah, the Democrats are over the line, but if it's, if they end up, even in a 50-50 scenario, you can, there are times in which sort of more of the states tilt in one direction and the other, especially given the unequal electoral college vote distribution. And if it's the now 40 or 30% that they get of the toss-ups, they're not over the line. In that case, the Republicans are over the line. The Republicans then win the 2020 election. So this is the JHK map. Just briefly, in terms of how it differs from the Our Progress map. The Our Progress map, I think probably correctly, has listed North Carolina essentially as a toss-up state. They favor it for Joe Biden. They've listed Georgia as a toss-up state, again, with a little bit of a tip for Joe Biden. Florida is a toss-up state. Again, Joe Biden is currently winning in their models. Texas is a toss-up state. Here, Donald Trump is winning in their models. And Iowa is a toss-up state. Donald Trump is winning, but by a very, very tiny fraction of 0.2% in their model. So really, honestly, I wouldn't even have put that in there, because 0.2% is well within the margin of error of any given poll. And Ohio as well. Donald Trump is apparently winning with 0.1%. Though I think that's their probability. So plus 0.1% is probably their probability, because if you look at the percents, Donald Trump has 50.4% of the popular vote against Joe Biden's 49.6%, which is actually a 0.8% popular vote margin. And given that Ohio, the electors hand the state on the plurality, that would then tip it toward Trump. So it wouldn't be 0.1, it would be 0.8. The 0.1, I think, reflects the probability that they're going to win their model. So, for example, over here, they have Joe tipped at 85.9%. That doesn't mean he's going to win 85.9% of the popular vote. That means there's an 85.9% chance that he wins. So if you ran 100 elections right now, in 85.9 of them, Joe would win. And in 14.1% of them, according to their model, Trump would win. So they do it a little bit differently. They've also got, they've got Nebraska and Maine correctly listed as a bit as sort of split vote states. But otherwise, the models are quite similar. Let's see here. Yeah, very, very similar. They've got Colorado as well for the Democrats. But yeah, so what I would say is that this is probably how I would adjust this. North Carolina isn't the only toss-up state here. There's a couple others here. And, in order to justify this, I would cite the 2016 election, where all of these states were firmly in the Democrat camp continuously throughout the election, and were actually volatile enough that they could change. So I wouldn't, if you're a Democrat, I would not say you have this in the bag, and if you're a Republican, I would absolutely not say that you have this in the bag. This is a fierce contest that's going to occur in these states, and so we'll see what happens. But but as you include more and more toss-up states and you randomly allocate them, the Democrats have less and less of a chance of winning the election. So it really depends on how many of these states you think are toss-up and how many you don't. So let me know what you think about this in the comment section below. And if you like this video, hit like, hit follow, hit subscribe, and thanks for watching.